Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about psychedelics and plant medicine, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I am your host, Scott Mason. Now, normally, this is where we go into an intro about the guests, and you get to learn a little bit about who they are and why they're here. Our guests today are going to take a different approach, but in terms of who they are, I do want to welcome each of you to the show. David, Joe, Rich, and Katherine, welcome to the Webdelics podcast. It's good to have you here. Now, this episode is about the transformative power of psychedelics on regular people, just like folks who are listening to and watching this show. We have interviewed so far a lot of scientists, businessmen and women, lawyers, subject matter experts from a whole host of fields that have given us a broad view of what psychedelics are and how they are going to impact, and how they already have impacted the human mind, the human spirit, and our culture itself. But subject matter experts, data, all that stuff, it only tells part of the story. Human stories are the ones that matter most of all. And today, we're going to hear some powerful and profoundly human stories about the transformative power of plant medicine. I'm grateful for each of our guests for being here today, for sharing your story. Without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to call out the name of the guest, and when you hear your name, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's start with you, Katherine.
Hi, Scott. So glad to be here on the Webdelics podcast. Yes, I am a dream coach, and I have been working with dreams for 10 or 15 years now. But I was trained as an astrophysicist. I have a PhD in astrophysics, and I worked for NASA for 13 years over in Mountain View. So I have the scientist's mind, and yet I also am very interested in the inner world and the dreams.
I love it. And I've got to say, of all of the astrophysicists turned dream workers that I know, and I know tons, you're easily my favorite. Rich, who are you? Tell us about yourself.
Okay, thanks for having me here. So I'm Rich Oceguera, and I am a media consultant and video visibility coach. And I work with mostly coaches, authors, online business owners, healers, people who have a big message they want to get out into the world, and they want to do that using video. Have a degree in television broadcast production, and been using video before we had them embedded in our phones. So I just love helping my clients to get over themselves so they can be seen and heard and be found where people are looking, which is searching for videos on the internet.
And I've got to say, a little birdie told me that there's no one better. David, tell us a little bit about you.
Hey everyone, thanks to Webdelics for having me, giving me this opportunity to use the platform to spread this and your important messages. David Morin here from South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, 48, 4 kids. I'm a performance coach, so I help people optimize their lives, also using ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. So I work with a psychiatrist out of New York, Dr. Jeff Ditzel.
Love it. And anyone that follows you on Instagram will likely find that yours is one of the most educational and entertaining platform accounts that's out there. So it's great to have you here. Joe, Apfelbaum.
Scott, thank you so much for having me on the
love
Webdelics
having you here.
podcast. I'm excited to be here. My name is Joe Apfelbaum. I'm the CEO of Ajax Union. We're a digital marketing agency, and we love helping companies be able to succeed online. We've been around for 14 years. We're featured as one of the fastest growing companies in the U.S., and I'm so grateful that I could to share this message. There's a big stigma about psychedelics in the world for whatever reason. We don't have to get into the reasons why it's there, but there's so many people that can be helped with these ideas, and I'm so grateful that Webdelics is putting out this incredible podcast to be able to share the truth about how people can take their lives to the
Thank
next
you. I
level.
appreciate you saying that. That is one of the things that got me most excited about being able to host this podcast, and even more excited about talking to each of you. We're going to start by talking a little bit more to you, David. I've got to say, I look at your Instagram account, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, and one of the things that you say is, Jesus is my brother. And I've got to say, speaking totally stereotypically here, having someone who's making that sort of commitment to their faith is not necessarily what I would expect, or who I would expect to see on a show about psychedelics. Talk to me a little bit about your journey and what led you here.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question that requires a long, elaborate response, but I'll try to compress that as best I can. I grew up Orthodox Christian Catholic, and there's a huge void in the scriptures about the identity of Christ, which led me to, the Silk Road of, the Gnostic texts and perhaps, some of the historical texts that backed up the migration of Jesus and what he learned. Of course, plants and plant medicine has just been suppressed. Altered states have been suppressed so much. And I found meditation at a young age. When I discovered how I could optimize my clarity, I was in martial arts and all that kind of integrated with my faith because I found myself trying to be a descender of life. So, in 2015, it all kind of, culminated to this near-death experience that I had. I have a atrial myxoma, so I have a benign vegetative tumor inside the wall of my atrium. At that point, I was already published on over 30 magazine covers. That's kind of like one of the face fitness. There was, intubated in a hospital, and I wasn't even strong enough to draw my own breath, so I had to get on a ventilator. So after the pulmonary embolism, I was intubated for 5 days in a 5-day coma. And I had already had brief kind of encounters with psychedelics. But to kind of differentiate, post pulmonary embolism and then pre and post pulmonary embolism, my perspective on psychedelics vastly changed because I had a very intimate experience with a near death. So I found, growing up, you go to college, your predominant altered state was alcohol, right? So you knew intoxication played a role, but it was a small sanctioned blatant for people to experience this kind of lowering of inhibitions and this playfulness, right? The abandonment of responsibilities. I think that the conventional context in which we experience psychedelics radically changed once I had that near-death experience. I became very, very curious about the reality that I experienced subjectively because I was able to confirm a legitimate out-of-body experience during my coma where on October 9th, which is my birthday in 2015, I observed myself above myself in a hospital bed, and I observed 3 people in the room with me that as soon as I observed those 3 people and I saw myself above myself disembodied, I jumped back in my body and I extubated myself. After 5 days, I was able to skillfully, and if you know about the intubation tube, how it's strapped to your face with a harness with Velcro, it's very secure. I was able to unconsciously take all of that stuff off spontaneously as soon as I regained consciousness. And at the bottom of the intubation tube, there's like a baseball-sized inflatable that secures the intubation in place. I removed all that like reflex, like I had done it 1,000 times. That was the big query with the physician is like, how did you do that?
Wow.
And he's like, you could have tore out your vocal cords,
Whoa.
but I didn't. And so immediately my question was, when they asked what happened, and I told them I saw myself, and I came back to my body, and I saw the 3 people in the room at the time when I did it. So I was able to confirm the 3 people that were in the room at the time. So I was in the astral plane, and I was able to identify the 3 people in the room. So when I regained consciousness, I confirmed with them that they were there. Now, what kept reoccurring days and days later is this profound kind of sense of being almost on the other side. My intuition was incredible. And my visionary states when I would meditate were just next level. So that led me into reframing what my preconceived notions were about psychedelics, because I was looking for answers. Because I felt like I had mapped out this astral region to an extent, or this other dimension to an extent, but I was curious. I wanted to explore more, which just led me to the cultivation of understanding that I believe in enlightenment is this process that I'm trying to demystify. And I know that sounds very grandiose, but in an attempt to understand that subjective individual who's on the couch, who has completely debilitated themselves with dopamine dependency, who uses external fixations, phones, food, porn, all these external stimulus to stimulate dopamine. They're basically in this dark place where they're not using agency to light up their brain, and maybe just turning off the remote and standing up and going, that's it, I've had enough. And then using some small actionable goal to light up their brain. Like fMRI scans that right there is enlightenment for me. It's very subjective to each person, but it's all about using psychedelics to at least give the subject some understanding of this space, of this terrain, and then building actionable goals each day that surpass and really destroy the paradigms of what they believe their life is possible for on every level of their existence. That's led me to dispel the stigma of from the 60s, the reefer madness and the LSD is going to fry your brain and all these things. Of course, science is vetting all of these substances from psilocybin to microdosing LSD to DMT. And I've done several ceremonies in Florida and abroad, fairly experienced with full spectrum of psychedelics. And haven't done salvia divinorum yet. I don't know if I'll try that one. But found huge success with ketamine. And then that led me into working with Dr. Jeff Ditzel for treatment-resistant depression, which there's a 60% efficacy in people that have tried conventional therapeutic models for depression. And one dose of ketamine combined with talk therapy, rewires the brain to BDNF, and the neuroplasticity allows them to kind of reformulate their life in such a profound way that's where I come in with my lifestyle intervention, my positive reinforcement with exercise, physiology, and small tasks and goals. So that transformative neurochemical bite that you get, that the chemistry of life that kind of lights up your brain, lights up your life, through that process and context of set and setting, has this lasting profound effect if you're able to take that spark and then cultivate that. And I think that's what myself and maybe many of you, and there's so many people out there that understand it's not a one-trick pony. It's not a one-pill-fix-all situation. It requires the human to connect with the human in a supportive role.
How has the psychedelic experience that you have had, or psychedelic experiences, changed you? And did it impact how you processed your near-death experience?
Well, Scott, it has deepened my capacity for empathy. The mind, in my experience, can't differentiate between a dream and reality or a psychedelic experience. And, there's a resistance in real time. There's going to be a resistance in the space of your experience in psychedelics. And to be a kind of a brave warrior, if you will, to have courage, courage is necessary to create meaning in your life. And I think this crisis meaning because there's not an invocation, there's not a reliance, there's no place for courage and question and stepping in the face of uncertainty anymore. It's more about comfort. And so I think my approach to life because of psychedelics has enhanced me in that way to where I can live my life with the fullest. Within 6 months after my near-death experience, I was on the cover of a magazine. It's like there was this thing in my heart, for a week. I would stay awake at night thinking, my heart's going to quit. I had physicians tell me I wouldn't be able to pick up 50 pounds, that I'd have to be on blood thinners for the rest of my life. And tremendous scar tissue on my lungs. I'm saying, you're going to be compromised. I remember one particular night, it's like, I woke up, I stood up, and, this is where my faith in Christ comes in as a conscious frequency, as a being of courage that you can call upon, that you can evoke within your own cells or your own DNA, that said, I did not come through all of this to lie here sleepless. I have peace, and I'm going to take it. And there's been several of these tests that psychedelics have allowed me to have that contrast of my own subjective experience embedded in kind of the social engineered reality versus this unlimited energetic space of which we're all eternal beings and all part of this grand consciousness. So that contrast was established through psychedelics, and that contrast has led me to a greater sense of peace and not facing the existential threat of disease or death or all these things that plague us, these fears. I think courage really does change, is a game changer for people.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. You've talked about dreams. That seems like a natural place to take the conversation to. Katherine, I see you looking up and perking just a little bit. What made you think that we would say your name in relationship to dreams? Come on.
Oh, well, this is great. I'm just taking notes while David's speaking, because there's a lot here that I can really relate to. And I didn't have a near-death experience in that way. And for me, the way psychedelics really helped me was that in college, in the early 80s, I was using alcohol. Like David was saying, that alcohol was kind of the drug of choice. And I wouldn't say I was ever alcoholic, but I was getting blackout drunk a couple times a month. And there was that's a lot. And there was just something there that I was looking for. And I didn't even really know that I was even looking for anything. It was just I just would I'd start to feel the alcohol taking effect, and I'm like, more. And I didn't know what I was wanting. And then, within a few years, some friends and I started to do LSD. This is the Grateful Dead crew that I was so connected to, which is so much a lifesaver in so many ways. And there was, and we did some LSD. We never did to the point of seeing intense visions that some do. But there is something that David was saying called death of the ego, which I think I definitely experienced many times. And there's some way that's what I was looking for with the alcohol. But the problem with the alcohol is that one of the annoying things is I couldn't remember it. The next day I'm like, what happened? I don't even know.
Right.
And so we were doing pretty light doses. We were out in nature with friends. But enough so that I would really let go. There was something where I was just and I started to recognize how tightly I wanted to hold on to control. And certain point with LSD, I would get to this point of just we're not going anywhere. This is the whole point. We're just going to be here. And there was something amazing. And I never use that phrase, but David, that was beautiful. The death of the ego. Some phrase of just the present is all I need. Here I am. And I think the relationship is also very helpful. For me, it was friend groups. And so it was in a community, in people that I felt safe with. And, I knew we could take care of each other, and we had set the environment up so, we knew we'd be safe. But there was just something that clicked for me about the psychedelics, that this is what I've been looking for. And the alcohol just kind of faded away. And so I was much more social afterwards with the alcohol, just, a few drinks with friends rather than the whole sucking down bottles to get blackout drunk. And, I think we used to joke about this in the early 80s. I had never heard this, but I used to joke, hey, drugs cured my alcoholism. And I thought it was a joke. I didn't know that 40 years later, we'd be talking seriously about this. But there is something very true about what I was looking for.
Well, and that does go as to one of the underlying themes that we have uncovered as the episodes in this show have gone on. Many people, including myself, as someone who has not had a history in the psychedelic world, I wouldn't categorize alcohol and psychedelics in the same place simply because alcohol, except during the Prohibition, has by and large been legal and socially accepted in our culture. Nonetheless, it does lead to an altered mental state. And so for a lot of folks who are uncomfortable with any mind-altering substance or with a drug, psychedelics that also alter the mental state, alcohol, and a whole host of other substances get swept together. But what I'm hearing you say, if I'm correct, is that at least in your experience, these are qualitatively significantly different. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, they are very different, and yet there's some urge that's the same. There's some urge. There's a kind of a spiritual urge, like they call it spirits. Alcohol is called spirits. It's like that there is something about that, and so I don't know. I would be cautious about categorizing them differently just because of their legal status, because we're moving toward a state where the psychedelics are more accepted, and so I think there is a difference in the way they affect us, but there is like the same urge can propel us to move. And even cannabis, which is becoming more and more accepted, can be psychedelic in certain ways. And I've been thinking about the dream connection, the connection with dreams and psychedelics, and my experience with that. If is it okay to go into that at this point?
Very much
Or do you
so.
want me
And
to
I was
wait?
going to ask you
Okay.
about it anyway.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things that dreams do is they take things from the waking life. They take things from the past. They take things from the present. They take things that are totally made up and they mix them all together. And they bring together these different ideas, these different memories, different experiences, and they put them together in new ways. And so there's a way that that I think that's happening on a neurological level, that actually the neurological pathways that are being stimulated during dreaming somehow allow us to relax our beliefs, and that we in waking world have some very rigid beliefs, which is fine. It's actually really useful to have a focus, to have a purpose and say, this is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going. But then at night, everything gets to shuffle. We get to kind of shuffle that up a little. And we go like, well, maybe I'll tweak that a little bit. And so the next day it's a little different. And I think psychedelics do something similar. I don't know about neurologically. I think, I've seen evidence that might be different, but there's something similar about this relaxed belief system that happens during psychedelics. You just like this state of letting go, like I was describing, I'm just here. Whatever is true right now. I'm in the present. And that like cracks open this sense of like, well, I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to be a certain way. And so it relaxes the beliefs. So I even have one of my dream mentors who calls dreaming kind of a microdose. Like we get a little microdose every single night. We get a little bit of psychedelics because like same way that dreams mix up all these states and images and memories. When psychedelics, they call it a hallucination, but usually I'm put it this way, I haven't really experienced a lot of pure hallucinations. Mostly it's a jumbling of the images that are already there. And that is sort of similar to what happens with the dreams, and that it takes images or it takes memories and neurological patterns that exist, but it twists them around and puts them together in new ways. And so it looks very different. So I think that psychedelics probably does something similar on a neurological level of like letting us like see things in a different relationship. And then we can kind of reorganize our priorities.
With that in mind, then, how would you say that the psychedelic experiences that you have had changed your life?
Well, for one thing is they really woke me up to the whole concept of spirituality. Like didn't know what I was looking for. I was raised Episcopalian. We were pretty intellectual, and it was like, oh, church is lovely. You get to see your friends, and it was very community oriented, which is a lovely thing. We all need that. But the whole thing of the looking for God was not really a part of my upbringing. At least I didn't take in any of that if there was. But there was something about psychedelics that kind of like focused me into realizing that there's more than this body, then there's more than this earth even, that there's something that when I relax into the present moment and let myself open to what's true, that there's way more here than my brain can even conceive of. And so it kind of opened me up to this idea that there's more. And so it also, I was going to say the word sanctified, I guess that's okay, sanctified that urge for the death of the ego, to let go of that. Like I was, instead of being like really focused and really driven, it's brought me to a place of like being driven in a different way, that like things come out of me rather than I tell myself what to do. It used to be, I think I told myself what to do a lot. And now it's more like, oh, this is what's true for me right now. And that's the spiritual. There's something about that's God speaking through me.
You've used the phrase, and David, you use it too. This question is for you, Katherine, now, but actually anyone who wants to respond should feel free to now, or if I turn to you later, Rich and Joe. What does death of the ego mean to someone like me who's never experienced it? I hear those words. It just sounds like I'm being super modest. Is that really what I'm talking about here?
Well, yeah, I understand, because it sounds like a little like double talk. Like, what does that mean? I will say that this is also a dream concept, the death of the ego, and that like there's like when you die in a dream or when someone dies, very often it's about some huge transformation that happens. And so for me, one of the things that means, and I'd be curious to hear what other folks have to say, is that it's letting go of my agenda. It's really just something as simple as letting go of my expectations and assumptions, and just really like surrender. There's like a moment of, okay, no, I'm just here. It's just true here, and there is nowhere for me to go, nothing for me to do. Kind of removing the preconceptions that I might have in my normal consciousness.
Rich, do you have thoughts about that?
I have so many thoughts. I'm so glad.
Telling them to us, please. We're waiting to hear.
Just on this topic, though, right? Not the story part.
This is your chance to tell your whole story.
Okay. Wow. So I'm really glad that David and Katherine went first, because each of your conversations have really like sparked so many different layers of this for me. And so, and Scott, I'm so glad that Webdelics is having this discussion, because it's so important. And just this panel here, I know that we could tap into, or the listeners could tap in or resonate with each of us in a different way to get their version of what matters about this
Very much
conversation.
So. Thank you.
But yeah, so when I was in my 20s, I discovered ketamine recreationally, ecstasy or MDMA, lots of other things, but we'll keep these into the more psychedelic drugs. And one of the things, I was having these flashbacks, Katherine, when you were speaking, of being on the dance floor in this amazing nightclub in Chicago. On the very first night that I got to experience this, it was my birthday, and it was like church, and I also grew up in a very charismatic, speaking in tongues, casting out devils type of Christian church, and very much involved with it. And I got outed when I was 17, and then basically forced to choose between God or being gay. And I said, I'm both. And they said, you can't. And so I said, well, then I'm gay. And I just knew at that point that there was some other way to access spirituality, or what I had then known as God. Okay, flash forward, my 20s, and I'm in the nightclub, and when the substances took hold, I literally was like, oh, this is heaven. That's Jesus. This is my church. And there was just this amazing ecstatic experience. And I have a very visual response to MDMA or ketamine, or of course mushrooms, psilocybin. And this wasn't me being conscious about this. It was me becoming very unconscious at that point. But getting these spiritual downloads, I would go into this very visual space that I can see right now, and very multidimensional place that's very colorful, and I could see my life. I could see the future of what was coming. I would become very activated with potential, my potential. Now, at that time, I was not necessarily using it in the most positive way. But it was an opening to this other dimension of possibility that is, I know I haven't done ayahuasca yet, but I've done the counterpart, which is called San Pedro, ayahuasca is considered the grandmother, or it's a female energy, and San Pedro is a masculine energy. And so I've done the masculine side of it. And in these places, when you use them consciously, and I would even say maybe in a guided way, with someone who is guiding you. David uses the word ceremony, right? It could also be a therapist who's guiding you through a process. There's a different outcome. There's a different result that you could get distinct from the recreational side. So, and I want to make that really clear. It was very fun to use these things recreationally, but that also led me to a near-death experience because I used it was a 4th of July weekend in Chicago. It was extremely hot, and that weekend we must have spent 3-4 days doing everything but heroin, because then I'd be an addict. So everything you could think of that you could inhale or put down your throat was on the menu, and that led me to the hospital and almost dying. And that's when I realized, okay, we need to cool it. But flash forward to this year. Now, what I haven't said yet is I'm extremely trained in transformation work in various spiritual paths, shamanism, Buddhism, Vedic traditions, mystical Christianity, Kabbalah. These are all part of my makeup. And it's the foundation of how I teach people how to be powerful on video. So no one quite does it the way that I show them. Quantum, psychology, like all of these things are part of how I teach. That said, during the COVID time, somehow I allowed myself to get disconnected from, it's not somehow, it's not a great mystery. I started watching the news. I started paying attention to the conversation of the world. I started being too invested in politics again, and concerned and fear and worry, and then being stuck in a house for all that time, went down a rabbit hole that I know that I purposely stayed out of prior to that. And what that led to was deep depression, complete disconnection from my spirituality, losing track of who I really am and what I do. And that led to literally out loud speaking about, ending it. I'm done. I don't belong here anymore. I've had enough. Luckily, I was able to speak to a traditional therapist who literally for 3 hours walked me off a ledge, and I had a little glimmer of hope. It's very shocking. If anyone, if you know me, Scott, you know me a bit, and like for me to even be saying these things out loud is like, what? That guy? But that's what happened. Yeah. And a friend of mine who is an amazing spiritual person, a leader, offered to lead me on a guided psilocybin journey, and I did. And doing that saved my life. It was the turning point, really. Beside the therapist who got me off the ledge, doing that guided journey reminded me, and I remember at the end of it, of course, it was very visual. Like I got to see these things that I had seen with using other substances in the past, but it was sort of like was recalibrating me, remembering me. I was remembering myself quite literally. And I remember towards the end of it, saying, how could I forget? How did I forget? How could I forget? Like that I was able to be brought back into who I really am, and all the work that I've done spiritually, ontologically, right? All this training for decades that I forgot temporarily. And it's all just kind of came back to me, and different hand gestures that come to me, especially using, psychedelics, mudras, which come from Vedic traditions, gestures of the hands that were just suddenly coming back to me. And I was like, whoa, how did I forget? like these superpower things for me, right? And after that, I just said, okay, all right, I'm here and I have a job to do. I'm on this planet for a reason. And let's get back to doing that, which is to support people who want to be seen and heard. Like the very thing I was about to extinguish in myself is what I'm here to help other people do. And I slowly started to come back into my practices. And I was in a relationship at the time, and my partner, who was witnessing all of this, kind of sat on the sidelines, but I just got myself back into, like David was saying, these small actions again, making sure I was meditating every day. I got Oculus VR headset, and I started doing this thing. Surprisingly, it's called, unsurprisingly, there's an amazing app in there called Trip, which is sort of this psychedelic experience without taking the drugs. It's this amazing, these guided journeys, meditations, and the voices of those two, the female and male voices in that, like I can hear them now. Literally, we're just like, come on, you know how this goes. You teach this stuff, like, let's get back over here. And I just built myself back up. I started working out again. I had gotten to almost 200 pounds, which is severely overweight for me. My doctors were telling me that I'm a very sick man.
Oh my God.
And then that primed me for just jumping into the quantum conversation where David alluded to this earlier. I am the creator of my reality. Like this is what I see. I don't have to take the drugs to remember that and to believe that and to operate in that, but completely did a turnaround and really am standing in that very different place of I am the king of my domain. I am the creator of my reality. And it's true because I say so. And this is the power of using our words, of using our intention, right? Using these tools. And I can honestly say, if I hadn't had that journey, that one particular guided journey, I don't know if I'd be here right now to be telling this story, right? Because I had gone down that rabbit hole so far that it had sucked me in and sucked me dry. And now I know, that that's what's possible when you don't use, when you invest yourself in the things that don't bring you life, that don't bring you energy. And I'm a huge advocate of using, in the proper way, in the right circumstances, using these tools, because they're tools, that are ancient, that have been here for millennia, in different cultures around the world in different ways, and they can be life-saving. So this is what happened, and again, I'm just so glad that we had this opportunity to talk about it, in this forum.
I'm so glad you shared that. And when I hear your story, the title of this episode, Psychedelics Saved Me, truly is a hint. Joe, this is the perfect place then to turn to you. It's interesting how you ended up being on this episode. The whole story is, y'all, Joe is a LinkedIn god. And he had a very interesting post one day. It was a photo, I think, of a mushroom. And he said something like, I don't remember the exact wording, but look at this tiny little plant. It causes so much controversy. I wonder why, or something very, very short and intriguing like that. And someone we mutually know naturally pointed to him in my direction. And before we knew it, Joe was on this show. Joe, your story around psychedelics is every bit as compelling as a lot of what we have shared so far. It's also a story that I think, from what I know of it, and you're going to share a lot more than I knew before, is unlike what a lot of other people might have imagined, just sort of knowing you out in the world. Talk to us.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so excited that we're doing this Webdelics thing. I mean, just even listening to you guys, David, Rich, Katherine, just listening to you guys tell your stories is very inspiring. So I'm excited about hearing all the other Webdelics episodes that we're going to be hearing here. So, Scott, the question that you asked before was, what does death of the ego mean? Right? You asked that question
Yes.
before. And to me, death of the ego is being able to observe your own identity and knowing that you're not the voice in your head. You might say, what voice? That's the voice I'm talking about. And we all know what that voice is. It's there judging and criticizing and all that stuff. So for me, the death of the ego allows me to turn off the right and the wrong, removing the judgment. I never even knew what judgment was. People, stop being judgy, stop judging, all that stuff. I didn't even know what that was. So I can observe and connect with people, with my children, with my parents. I would judge the crap out of my parents. And now, after having the experiences that I've had, and I'll talk more about my story briefly, I'm able to just be. I'm able to watch the sun rise. Think about that. I was not able to watch the sun rise because I would look and I'd be like, why the hell am I doing this? I should be making money. What the hell am I doing here? I need to be changing lives. I need to be creating businesses. I need to be designing things. I need to go, do. But we're not human doings. We're human beings. So the question is not what is the death of the ego, but instead, what is consciousness itself?
A profound question.
So ego is a construct that we created to survive this emotional turmoil that we go through life, right? We all have parents. We all have wounds. The 9-year-old wound, the 16-year-old wound, the 24-year-old wound. And I know my wounds clearly because I went through so much therapy to try to fix things that are not fixable. I'm boxing with ghosts, as my coach used to say. Joe, you're boxing with ghosts because they don't exist. We all have these beliefs and we're taught the way things should be. I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and let me tell you, there's a lot of beliefs. There's a lot of shame. Scott, everybody shoulds on us growing up. There's so much shame, which creates powerful emotions and brings us into fear. And many times, also as a Jewish person, guilt. You ever heard the term the Jewish guilt? It's like a term that gets used so much, and that controls us. That controls us and makes us small. And fear is what makes us to stop taking action. So understanding feelings, understanding thoughts, understanding that it's basically just energy that moves around is a whole new way of experiencing life. And when you add psychedelics, you open up the programming so you can shift the beliefs and notice the operating system that is basically just a transformational experience for me personally, using both regular mushrooms and then also using ketamine, going to and doing it in a facility, in a container, in a ceremony, with a doctor, not just going out and just randomly going to do party drugs. Because for me, it was all about personal development. Because now I understand that I have new neural pathways that create new connections to be able to let go of the emotions stuck in my body, in my mind body. There's a concept called mind body. And my beliefs and who I am. Imagine looking at a rose and seeing the rose without judging the rose. It's hard to do if you're in it, if you're in your ego. Imagine smelling a rose and feeling what it feels like to smell the rose without judging it, without being in this ego, without being in this identity of Joe, the CEO, the father, the this, the that is smelling. No, just smell the rose. No words to describe smell, just smell. Imagine touching the rose and experiencing touch. Now take it all together. Look, touch, taste, smell, and experience it all without language. Imagine seeing colors that you can't see. You can ask the experts. You guys are all much smarter than I am, but I heard it's common knowledge that animals can see colors and hear sounds that we cannot see or hear, correct? And there are also animals that can smell things that we can't smell. From far, far away. I heard a shark can smell from a mile away. I don't even know how they smell underwater, but they can smell. Maybe we can ask the doctor. But the bottom line is that we're able to experience, like Katherine said, a different dimension, also known as a spiritual dimension, because we can't measure it. So what's my story? Google approached me a little over 10 years ago to start doing seminars on behalf of Google. They called it becoming a certified Google trainer because I'm an expert in SEO, PPC.
Right.
And they said, which is basically digital marketing, and they said, would you be willing to teach small business owners on behalf of Google because you are the expert? And you can also service these customers after and help them spend more money with Google. So I said, of course, fill up my rooms. What I didn't know that I was afraid of public speaking. Scott, I did not know that I was afraid of public speaking. I had a fear, but I didn't know. Now I'm part of the National Speakers Association together with you, Scott. But before that, I had no idea that I was afraid. And I was completely shocked when I found out. And it was crazy.
I have a feeling the audience is going to have a hard time believing that. But good for you. Go on.
Go on YouTube. Go on YouTube and look at my videos from 10 years ago. You're going to see how self-conscious I was, how in my ego I was, how worried I was about everybody's opinions. I was 265 pounds. I was smoking. I was abusing food. I had major mood swings. I did not have integrity with my word. I said I had ADD. I did not. I didn't keep my word. There were things that I didn't know about myself that I couldn't see. Like I had protections. I was wearing a mask. And I started doing personal development to try, I went to coaches, I went to therapy. I was trying to figure out how to be fulfilled deep down inside. I built my business to be one of the fastest growing companies in America, but I still wasn't happy. So I was like, okay, I got to my goal and I'm still not happy. What the hell's going on? So I had to find the answer. So I joined all these groups of CEOs and I looked at all these CEOs and some of them were really happy inside and they were really content. So, and some of them went to Tony Robbins, so I did Tony Robbins. Some of them went to Landmark, so I did Landmark education. I tried journaling, coaching, therapy, meditation, affirmations, reading hundreds of books, watching videos, taking seminars, getting courses. I heard everything and I understood it conceptually, but I didn't experience it. And it wasn't until my first ceremony in 2019, a guided ceremony with a therapist, with a doctor, with an expert in psychedelics, in a very safe way, doing HEPA, doing cacao, whatever you have to do over there, getting rid of the spirits, using whatever they do to get rid of the spirits with smoke and whatever, and then just going right into it and with intention, sitting before, understanding what I need to get clean with and experiencing what I experience, which is things that I can't, words can't even describe what I was able to experience, but this general feeling of I'm not alone. This general feeling is we're all one. Like seeing the patterns in the sky, feeling the ear, being able to even see the ear around me. And when I push the ear, I feel the whole world moving. When I think a thought, the thought changes. They say thoughts are things, feelings are things. Yeah, we're emanating all around us. And everything we do creates a shift. Like when a butterfly flays his wings, all of a sudden I know what that means intuitively deep down inside. And so I was then comfortable getting divorced. I was in a marriage for 20 years that we were both not happy. We were not bad people. We just were, 5 kids. It's a big shift to be able to make a decision like that. I made many decisions. That wasn't the only decision that I made, but I made many decisions after it took me months of integrating my experience, and I'm still integrating my experience.
Joe, what made you decide finally to take this particular route after all of the other self-development programs and activities you engaged in?
It was a culmination. It was like a new neural pathway. It was now I experience. It's a whole level of comfort of just being in the present moment and being okay with now. I was never okay with now because I was always stuck in then or when. And instead, I just was now all of a sudden I'm like, my beliefs are beliefs. And the noise is just noise. And what I was yelling the whole time, and I remember, because I was conscious during the whole time, I was yelling the following: even noise is noise! Even noise is noise! That's all I was yelling. And I was like, that I still keep that. That's like my takeaway of my first one. That was mushrooms. And then after, I had some religious trauma I had to process because I had a hard time walking into a synagogue for a while, and COVID, they stopped it, and they didn't have synagogues, nobody was doing it, and then all of a sudden it started again, and I had a hard time, and so I really wanted to figure out what to do. So someone suggested a ketamine therapy. So I went to Manhattan. I did a lot of holotropic breath work. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that, but you can get into an altered state just by breathing. You don't need psychedelics to get into an altered state. You can simulate that state by certain types of breath work. And if you guys haven't read the book called Breath, it's a great book to read that has a lot of science by James Nestor. It has a lot of science and studies around how breath works. And he did, for decades he studied it, and he wrote this crazy book that basically discusses breath and our relationship to breath and different types of breathing and so on. So I did breath work, and I got myself into an altered state where I actually had a conversation with my grandfather who passed away. And he helped me be able to reconcile some of the religious trauma that I had. And then after, when I did the ketamine, it really put everything together. And it kind of was like a continuation from 2019. 2 years later, I did the ketamine, and I continued from where I left off during the trip in 2019. It's almost like, I'm back here! Woo! Like that. I'm back there. And I felt like I was flying and like things were happening. But I felt the neural connections, the neural pathways being created. I literally felt it in my mind. I don't
Wow.
even know how to describe the mind or the brain or whatever. I felt access. Now have access to things that I would never be able to. And it's hard to describe experience, Scott, because experience, you put words on it, then you contained it, you labeled it. When you see sunrise and I describe sunrise, it's not the same as seeing sunrise. It's not the same as feeling sunrise. It's not the same as feeling sunrise in the gut of your chi. Your chi. I started doing qigong. All the different people that have entered my life since I did this, it's like almost the universe is sending me the right people at the right time when I'm able to access it and see it. And so just like I walk into a networking event with 50 CEOs now. Everyone's like, the light just walked in. I am the light of the room, not because I'm important. Not because I accomplished more than the guy who's running a $500 million company. Not because of that. It's because I am just there. Because I am literally seeing every person for the God that he or she is. And people are just like, I don't understand what's going on. We're all living in a movie and you're like outside the movie. Yes, I am knowing that I am watching a movie, and I am knowing that I have a choice of what movie to watch at any given moment. And you guys that done this know what the hell I'm talking about. And people that haven't, they're not going to understand because it's experience. It's a different dimension. And that's what I'm going to give you today. And that's where I'm
And it is a lot for us to chew on, a lot for us to think about. And I appreciate you sharing it. Such passion. Quickly, before we wrap up, I'd like to turn to each of you and ask if there is one single thing that you would like the audience to take away from the conversation today and what you shared, or maybe something that you haven't had a chance to share. What would that be? David, I'm going to start back with you.
I mean, it goes back to what everyone talked about today. You know, you are an individual. You know, there is no one like you. Your DNA, down to your life experiences, down to everything chosen. And it's time to start choosing to have the uncomfortable experiences that are really going to help you grow in such a profound, transformative way. So don't let fear, reservations, and excuses and that little box that you put yourself in and what you think you're capable of stop you from having the experience. You don't have to believe that enlightenment can be accomplished of 50 years living in an ashram and shaving your head and saying mantras all the time. Like you can start activating that biological process. And if you feel like you're stuck in a space where you just all out to, get with a psychedelic professional and have a plant journey. As you digest that plant is going to digest you. It's going to digest your ego. It's so profound. It's like Joe was saying, you can't describe, it's ineffable. You can't talk about God because the minute you do, then you have religion and then you have war. It's like, if you're able to conceptualize the fact that when your physical body dies, it'll be digested into the earth and it'll become a part of the plants anyway. So maybe on a quantum level, when you take that plant and you digest it, it digests you and you become part of this grand thing that we're experiencing called life. And it's up to you. There is a component to the religious tradition that does say that your free will is required. And like the therapist model that we're talking about with shaman's a therapist, 2 or more in the name and I'm there. The spirit is there. So find someone, find a professional, trust the fact that life already knows. You don't have to know. Life knows. And take part in that grand tradition. I encourage you.
Rich.
Totally echo what David just said. And really, you are not a body and you are not your mind either. Ego is of the mind. You are consciousness and there's conscious awareness, right? And even above that, there's nothingness, but that's beyond this conversation right now. But getting into the world of consciousness, this is where you get to observe the body that you think you are and the mind and the thoughts that you think you're having. But you're pure consciousness. And if you're in a place, like David was saying, like I was sharing, if you get into this rut that you can't seem to get out of, then getting with someone who's trained, who's a professional to support you, perhaps with one of these psychedelics, could literally be life-changing or life-saving. And you're here for a purpose, You're here right now for a reason, and there's something you have to offer the world, and so do that. Don't let anything or anyone keep you from fulfilling the mission that you came here to fulfill. There's a way to do that, and it might be through using the power of plant medicine to get you there.
In a world where mental health challenges seem to be utterly overwhelming, that's a message I think a lot of people are going to need to hear. Joe.
If you're uncomfortable using plant medicine, you could use breath work. There are many ways to get to the same place. So, ultimately, when you are ready, the right teacher, the right environment will come to you. The question is, what are you struggling with? What are you frustrated with? Really lean into that frustration. As David said and Rich said, like leaning into the uncomfort, like you were not meant to live to be comfortable. When you die, you will be comfortable. The things that are making you uncomfortable are action signals for you to be able to experience a whole new level of life. And so if you're experiencing pain and suffering is not the same thing. I want everyone to know that one thing is that pain and suffering is not the same thing. Suffering is not being able to change the pain. And just having pain alone is just knowing that there's something there that needs to change. There's something there that needs to transform. And if you start looking for it, the answer will show up. Just start looking for it. Start asking better questions. Don't look for solutions. Ask better questions. Like I shifted the question from before as what is the ego to what is consciousness. Just shift the question. Keep asking questions. And the more questions you ask, the more curious you are, the more you will be able to experience things that you've never experienced before. Changing
the narrative, asking the questions is what this show is all about. And I find it really interesting and frankly motivating that that's where you chose to take this conversation. Thank you so much for that. Katherine, I'm going to give the last word of the day to you.
Scott, this is an amazing conversation. There are so many things that are coming up for me, and one of the keys, though, I feel is that this place, like Joe was saying, that when he went back into the psychedelics, and it was the same. It was like it's been there all the time. Like this world, this other world, this world where there is where the ego or where that voice goes away. It's there. It's available to us all the time. And when we and I think that's the same kind of world we go into when we're dreaming, and that there is something where there's all kinds of possibilities, and where those voices like become characters. I love it when a voice that's in my head that's been like bugging me shows up in a dream as another person. Like, oh my God, look, it's outside of me. It's not me. It's like, and then I get some freedom, because then I'm like, I hear the voice like, oh God, that voice again, but I'm recognized it's not me. That's just part of my ego, or that's part of, my training or programming or something. And I also wanted to say that one of the big parts of the journey of the psychedelics and the journey around dreaming has been learning to trust myself. And we've been getting to that in the last few bits here. And I don't mean trusting the voice, not that voice in my head, that voice that goes, nah, 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 but trusting the urges that come from much deeper down. And I love what Joe's saying about don't ignore your pain, that I was very, very unhappy for many years. And I thought that's just what life is like. And that's not true.
Yeah.
That pain is useful. It has information in it. And there's many different ways to address it. There's psychedelics, there's breath work, there's dreaming, there's all kinds of things. And so like trusting yourself about what level of comfort you want to go into, but don't ignore that voice. So I really appreciate this conversation. Scott, this is amazing. And Joe, David, Rich, thank you.
Yeah, it's been mind-blowing, and I cannot wait to hear what the reactions will be from people who watch this or who listen to it. Katherine, Joe, Rich, David, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did today. It's been fascinating and enlightening too. Now, for those of you who are listening or watching the Webdelics podcast, we have some amazing episodes coming up. We have surprising topics that we're going to discuss, such as psychedelics as a leadership development modality. We're going to talk about the integration of psychedelics into your life and how understanding and bringing these experiences together can cement the transformative impact that they have. We are also going to have an episode that I'm very excited about, and that will be profound, which is psychedelics and dealing with the end of your life. If you have enjoyed today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe and leave a review or a comment. Tell all the folks that you know about what we're doing. Don't forget to follow Webdelics on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And be sure to check out webdelics.com. That's webdelics.com. And subscribe to our blog where you will get trusted information about psychedelics and plant medicine. And then be sure to tune in next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.